The crash site still smoldered 3 days later, a twisted monument of metal and hope scattered across the Nevada desert. I stood at the perimeter fence watching the rescue teams work, my xenobiology credentials getting me closer than most, but not close enough to help. The first alien contact in human history, and we were treating it like a contamination zone. Dr. Chen, you shouldn't be here. Colonel Morrison appeared beside me, his face grim behind the reflection of his sunglasses. The situation is complicated. Through the chain link, I could see the survivors, 43 beings from another world, huddled in makeshift quarantine tents while hazmat-suited soldiers stood guard. They looked humanoid from a distance, 2 arms, 2 legs, heads in roughly the right place. But their skin had an otherworldly quality that seemed to shift between blue and silver in the desert sun. They're not animals, Colonel, I said, gripping the fence. They're refugees. Their ship wasn't built for war. Look at the design. Those are civilian modifications. Refugees from what? He crossed his arms. They haven't been able to communicate beyond basic gestures. For all we know, they're scouts for an invasion force. A commotion near the largest tent caught my attention. A group of soldiers had backed away from something, their body language screaming revulsion. I pressed against the fence, trying to see what had spooked them. Then I saw her. She couldn't have been more than 12 in human years, though alien physiology made it hard to tell. Unlike the adults, her skin wasn't just blue-silver. It pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that crawled across her arms and face like living tattoos. The patterns were beautiful, like constellations mapping themselves in real time, but the soldiers saw something else entirely. Jesus Christ, one of them muttered loud enough for me to hear. Look at those things moving under her skin. It's like she's infected with something. The girl sat alone on a crate, 20 feet from the nearest adult of her species. Even her own people seemed to be keeping their distance. She drew patterns in the sand with one elongated finger, her movements slow and deliberate. When she looked up and caught me staring, her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, ancient and sad. She's sick, Colonel Morrison said, following my gaze. The medical team thinks those markings might be some kind of parasitic infection. Could be contagious. Or they could be natural bioluminescence, I countered. Many Earth species use light for communication, mating displays, territorial marking. Dr. Chen. His voice carried a warning. I know your history. I know what happened to your family in the camps during the water wars. But this isn't the same situation. My jaw tightened. He was right about my history. My parents had been climate refugees, forced from their flooded homeland and treated like vermin by every country they'd begged for shelter. I'd been 7 when we'd finally found sanctuary in the North American Federation. Old enough to remember the looks of disgust, the way people crossed streets to avoid us, the way they talked about us like we weren't human. But he was wrong about this not being the same situation. I want to interview her, I said. Absolutely not. The quarantine protocols are being written by people who've never made first contact with an alien species. I turned to face him. I'm the only xenobiologist within 500 miles who speaks 4 languages and has experience with refugee populations. If you want to establish communication, you need me in there. The girl looked up again, and this time she stood. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin brightened, spreading from her arms up to her neck and face. The soldiers took another step back, muttering about containment breaches and infection protocols. But I saw something different. The patterns weren't random. They formed symbols, complex geometric shapes that pulsed in sequence. She was trying to communicate. Colonel, I said quietly, she's not sick. She's talking. Before he could stop me, I was walking toward the main gate. The guards there knew me by sight. I'd been arguing with their superiors for 3 days straight. They looked uncertain as I approached. Dr. Chen, one of them started, you don't have authorization. Then get me authorization. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Because in about 30 seconds, I'm going to document humanity's first conversation with an alien intelligence, and your choice is whether it happens with official blessing or as evidence in a war crimes tribunal. It was a bluff, but it worked. The guard got on his radio. 20 minutes later, I was suited up in full hazmat gear, walking into the quarantine zone with my tablet, recording equipment, and a stomach full of butterflies. The adult aliens watched me with expressions I couldn't read, but they didn't seem hostile. Curious, maybe. Hopeful. The girl was still sitting on her crate, still drawing in the sand. As I'd approached, the patterns on her skin shifted to a soft blue-white, less intense than before. She looked up at me, tilted her head, and spoke. The sound was like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze, musical and layered with harmonics that made my chest vibrate. Beautiful, but completely alien. I knelt in front of her, moving slowly, and held up my hands. "Hello," I said in English, then repeated it in Mandarin, Spanish, and Arabic. "My name is Sarah." She watched my mouth as I spoke, her head tilting further. Then she stood and walked over to her sand drawings. They weren't random doodles. They were star charts. Constellations I recognized mixed with others I didn't, connected by lines and symbols that looked almost mathematical. She pointed to one cluster of dots, then to herself. Home. Then she drew a line to another cluster and made a sound like breaking glass. Destruction. "Your world," I whispered. "Something happened to your world." She nodded, a gesture that was apparently universal, then pointed to a third cluster. Earth's constellation, viewed from her perspective. She drew careful lines connecting Earth to her drawings of destruction, then looked at me with those ancient eyes. The message was clear. We're not just refugees. We're here to warn you. The patterns on her skin flared bright orange, urgent, and desperate. She grabbed my gloved hand and pointed to the sky, then to her people, then to her drawings of destruction. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. "What's coming?" I asked. "What destroyed your world?" But before she could answer, alarms started blaring across the camp. The sound cut through the desert air like a knife. Harsh, mechanical, designed to trigger panic. Red lights flashed from every watchtower as soldiers scrambled into defensive positions. Through my hazmat suit's radio, I heard Colonel Morrison barking orders about perimeter breaches and incoming bogies. The alien girl's bioluminescent patterns exploded into brilliant white, so bright I had to shield my eyes. Around us, every adult alien began making the same wind chime sounds, but distorted now, urgent and afraid. They weren't looking at the sky like the soldiers were, they were looking at each other, and at the girl. "Dr. Chen, get out of there now." Morrison's voice crackled through my comm. "We've got 3 unidentified objects approaching fast from the southeast." I stood, but the girl grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and the light patterns racing across her skin had shifted to rapid pulses of red and gold. She was trying to tell me something, her musical language becoming more frantic. "I don't understand," I said, kneeling back down. "What are you trying to say?" She pointed to herself, then to the approaching sky, then made a slashing motion across her throat. The meaning was universal enough. "They're coming for me." The roar of jet engines filled the air as our interceptors scrambled, but something felt wrong. The girl's people weren't acting like they were being rescued. They were acting like they were about to be executed. Through the chaos, I noticed something the soldiers had missed. The adult aliens were forming a protective circle around the children, but they were also moving away from the girl. Even in their terror, they were isolating her. "Why?" I whispered. "Why are they afraid of you two?" She looked up at me with those ocean-deep eyes and pressed something into my gloved hand. It was warm, warmer than her body temperature should have allowed. And when I looked down, I saw a small crystalline structure that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns as her skin. The crystal showed me images. Not hallucinations. Actual visual information projected directly into my mind. I saw her world as it had been. Vast cities of living light. Beings like her people, but more advanced, more evolved. I saw the thing that came from the dark spaces between stars. Something that devoured light itself, feeding on the bioluminescent energy that powered their civilization. And I saw why she was different. The patterns on her skin weren't just communication or decoration. They were a weapon. A living archive of her people's most dangerous knowledge, encoded in her DNA and expressed through her bioluminescence. She was a walking library of everything they'd learned about fighting the darkness that had consumed their world. That's why her own people feared her. That's why the approaching ships weren't coming to rescue. They were coming to destroy the weapon before it could be used. Jesus, I breathed, understanding flooding through me. You're not just a refugee. You're their insurance policy. The crystal crumbled to dust in my hand, its message delivered. The girl nodded, then pointed to the sky where 3 sleek ships had appeared, moving with impossible grace between our fighter jets. They weren't attacking our aircraft. They were ignoring them completely, focused entirely on the camp below. All personnel, this is Morrison. We have a situation. The approaching craft are not responding to communications and are not of terrestrial origin. I repeat, we have additional alien contact. My blood went cold. These weren't more refugees. The girl tugged on my suit, then pointed to herself and made a pushing motion toward the camp's exit. She wanted me to take her away from here, away from her own people who would sacrifice her to appease the hunters, away from the humans who saw her as a contamination. I can't, I said. The protocols, the quarantine. She interrupted me with a sound like crystal breaking, then showed me her arm. The bioluminescent patterns there had changed, forming what looked unmistakably like a countdown. Numbers in some alien mathematics, but the concept was universal. Time running out. Above us, the alien ships had stopped their approach. They hovered motionless, 1,000 feet up, waiting. One of our F-35s got too close to investigate and simply stopped. Not shot down, not destroyed, just frozen in midair like a mosquito in amber. Dr. Chen, Morrison's voice was tight with fear now. The objects have deployed some kind of field. Our aircraft are immobilized. We need you to get clear of the quarantine zone immediately. But I was looking at the girl, at the countdown on her arm that now showed what might have been minutes, and I made a choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I started stripping off my hazmat suit. What are you doing? The nearest soldier stepped forward, rifle raised not at the aliens but at me. She's not contaminated, I said, pulling off the helmet and breathing unfiltered air for the first time in 3 days. The girl's patterns shifted to soft blue. Surprise, maybe even hope. Those markings aren't a disease. They're a language, a weapon, and a warning all in one. I reached out my bare hand to her. And right now, she's the only thing standing between humanity and whatever destroyed her world. The girl stared at my outstretched hand for a long moment. Around us, soldiers were shouting, her people were wailing, and the hunter ships hung in the sky like executioners' axes. But in that moment, it was just 2 beings from different worlds, choosing to trust each other. She took my hand. The moment our skin made contact, every pattern on her body flared brilliant white, and I felt something impossible. A connection that went deeper than language, deeper than species. I could feel her fear, her loneliness, her desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, humans might be different from everyone else who had abandoned her. "What's your name?" I asked. The sound she made was like starlight-given voice, but somehow I understood it perfectly. Zara. Above us, the hunter ships began to descend. The first hunter ship touched down 50 yards from the quarantine fence with the silence of falling snow. No engines, no landing thrusters, just a seamless descent that defied everything I knew about physics. The craft itself was beautiful in a terrible way. like a black pearl sculpted from living shadow, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Zara's grip on my hand tightened, her bioluminescent markings shifting to deep crimson. Through our connection, I felt her terror, not of death, but of something far worse. She showed me flashes of memory. Others like her, children with the same glowing patterns, being taken by ships just like this one. I saw them later, empty-eyed and hollow, their light extinguished, walking as puppets for the darkness that had consumed their world. "They don't kill us," she whispered in English, perfect, unaccented English that she'd somehow learned from our brief contact. "They hollow us out, use us as shells." Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the calm chaos. "All units, hold your fire. I repeat, do not engage. We don't know their capabilities." But I could see the soldiers' fingers tightening on triggers, see the sweat beading on faces behind gas masks. Humanity's first instinct when faced with the unknown wasn't wonder. It was violence. A section of the Hunter ship's hull dissolved like smoke, and something emerged. It stood 7 feet tall with the basic humanoid shape of Zara's people, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was the color of deep space, so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where Zara's markings pulsed with life and color, this thing's body was traced with veins of sickly yellow light that moved like infection through dead tissue. It spoke, and the sound was Zara's musical language corrupted into something that made my bones ache. But somehow, I understood every word. "Return the archive," it said, looking directly at us. "Return what was stolen, and your species will be granted the mercy of quick extinction." Around the quarantine zone, Zara's people fell to their knees, making sounds of submission and terror. But their fear wasn't directed at the Hunter. It was directed at Zara herself. They were terrified of what she might do. "Sarah," Zara said, using my name for the first time. "I need to tell you what I really am before they take me. Before I lose the chance." The Hunter began walking toward us, each step leaving small craters in the hard-packed earth. Our soldiers raised their weapons but didn't fire. "What do you shoot at something that treats physics like a suggestion?" "I'm listening," I said, pulling her toward the camp's exit. "If we could reach my vehicle, maybe we could get away. Buy some time." "I'm not just carrying the archive," she said, stumbling as I led her between the tents. "I am the archive. My parents, they didn't just encode the weapon in my DNA. They turned me into it. Every pattern on my skin is a line of code. Every pulse of light is a calculation. I'm a living computer designed to destroy the devourers." "The what?" "That's what we call them. The things that eat light, eat life, eat entire civilizations, and leave nothing but hungry darkness behind." She stopped suddenly, pulling me around to face her. "But the weapon isn't just about destroying them, Sarah. It's about replacing them. To fight something that consumes life, we had to become something that creates it." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're not just a weapon against them. You're a seed for rebuilding what they destroy." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Tears that glowed with soft blue light. "That's why my people fear me. That's why they gave me up. Because to activate the archive, to become what I was designed to be, I have to." She struggled with the words. "I have to consume the life force of my own species. I have to become a devourer myself, just pointed in the opposite direction." Behind us, the Hunter had reached the quarantine fence. The chain link simply ceased to exist as it passed through, not cut or melted, but somehow convinced it had never been there at all. "Dr. Chen." Morrison's voice over the comm was desperate now. "Get away from the subject. It's compromised." But I wasn't leaving her. I couldn't. The scared little girl I'd first seen drawing star charts in the sand was also a weapon capable of consuming entire species. But she was still a scared little girl who just wanted someone to see her as more than a monster. "There has to be another way," I said, leading her toward the parking area where my Jeep waited. Some way to activate the archive without. There is. Her voice was so quiet, I almost missed it. But you won't like it. We reached my vehicle just as the hunter entered the main camp. The screaming started immediately, not from the humans, but from Zara's people. The hunter moved through them like a shark through a school of fish, touching each adult alien briefly. Where it touched, their bioluminescent patterns died, leaving gray, lifeless skin behind. It's harvesting them, Zara said, her own patterns flaring with rage. Taking their light to power itself, to make itself stronger for what comes next. What comes next? She looked at me with those ancient eyes, and I saw the weight of her species' extinction pressing down on her small shoulders. The real invasion. This hunter, the other two ships, they're just scouts. When they report back that they've recovered the archive, the Devourer fleet will come to claim Earth as their new feeding ground. I started the Jeep's engine, my hands shaking. So we don't let them report back. Sarah, you don't understand. I can stop them. Stop all of them. But the power required. She held up her hands, and I saw that the countdown on her arm had changed. Not time until something happened to her. Time until she had to make an impossible choice. The alternative way to activate the archive, I said, understanding flooding through me. It's not about consuming your people. It's about consuming yourself. She nodded. A cascade reaction. I burn out every pattern, every line of code, every piece of myself to create one massive pulse of creative energy. It would destroy every devourer in this solar system and seed the space around Earth with new life, new possibilities. Your species would be safe. But you'd die. Worse, I'd be erased. Not just killed, completely consumed like I never existed at all. She looked back at the camp where the hunter was still harvesting her people. But if I don't do it, both our species die anyway. The hunter finished with the adult aliens and turned toward us. Even from a quarter-mile away, I could feel its attention like ice water in my veins. It began walking in our direction, not hurrying. It knew we had nowhere to run. How long? I asked, putting the Jeep in gear. The countdown on my arm? 3 hours until the choice becomes irreversible. After that, the archive will either activate automatically or the Devourers will tape me and twist the weapon into something that serves them instead. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning in the sand as we raced away from the camp. In the rearview mirror, I watched the hunter ship launch itself into the air, following us with the patience of something that had all the time in the universe. Where are we going? Zara asked. I had been thinking about that since the moment she'd shown me her star charts. If she was going to sacrifice herself to save 2 worlds, the least I could do was make sure she spent her last few hours somewhere other than a government facility being poked and prodded by people who saw her as a specimen. Home, I said. We're going to my house. You said no one wanted to touch the dirty alien girl, right? Well, I've got a spare bedroom, a pantry full of food, and the best shower in Phoenix. If you're going to save the world, you're going to do it clean, fed, and knowing that at least one human being thinks you're worth saving just because you exist. She stared at me for a long moment, her patterns shifting through colors I had no names for. Then she laughed, a sound like silver bells that made my chest ache with its beauty. You're crazy, she said. Yeah, I replied, watching the hunter ship growing larger in my mirror. But I'm the good kind of crazy. The kind that makes warm showers and chocolate chip cookies at 3 in the morning. For the first time since I'd met her, Zara's bioluminescent patterns settled into steady, peaceful blue. We had 3 hours to be human together before she had to become something else entirely. My house sat on the outskirts of Phoenix, a modest adobe structure that had been built by someone who understood that the desert demanded respect, not conquest. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, and a small garden of native plants created patches of green that didn't apologize for existing in an inhospitable place. It was perfect for someone who spent her life studying the ways living things adapted to impossible circumstances. Zara had gone quiet during a 40-minute drive, her bioluminescent patterns dimmed to barely visible pulses beneath her skin. She sat pressed against the passenger door, staring out at the landscape with an expression I was learning to read. Wonder mixed with grief. Everything was new to her, but everything reminded her of what she'd lost. "It's beautiful," she said as we pulled into the driveway. "Your world. Even the empty places are full of life." I killed the engine and looked back down the highway. No sign of pursuit yet, but I knew that wouldn't last. The hunter had seemed content to follow at a distance, perhaps confident that there was nowhere we could go that would matter. It was probably right. "Come on," I said, grabbing my emergency bag from the back seat. "Let's get you inside before the neighbors start asking questions about why I'm harboring a glowing alien child." She actually smiled at that, a genuine expression of amusement that made her patterns brighten. "Is that what you're doing? Harboring me?" "Among other things." I unlocked the front door and held it open for her. "I'm also offering you the best shower of your life, teaching you how to make pancakes, and giving you a safe place to figure out how to save two worlds without erasing yourself from existence." She paused in the doorway, her head tilted in that curious way I'd learned meant she was processing something complex. Why? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything. Why risk my career, my freedom, possibly my life for someone I'd known for less than 6 hours? Why take home a being whose touch could potentially kill me, whose very existence might doom both our species? "Because," I said, stepping inside and turning on the lights, 30 years ago, I was 7 years old and covered in mud from a refugee camp. I was hungry, scared, and everyone who looked at me saw contamination instead of a child. One social worker, her name was Mrs. Patterson, took me home for a hot meal and a bath. She didn't save the world, but she saved mine. Zara stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the comfortable chaos of my living room. Books stacked on every surface, artifacts from a dozen archaeological digs, photos of landscapes from around the world. A life lived in the spaces between cultures, always looking for connections. "She saw you as a person," Zara said softly. "She saw me as a person," I confirmed. And that made all the difference. The patterns on Zara's arms shifted to warm gold, and I felt something through our lingering connection. Not words, but pure emotion. Gratitude so profound it made my chest ache, mixed with a bone-deep loneliness that came from being the last of her kind, the only one carrying the weight of an impossible choice. "Bathrooms down the hall," I said, giving her space to process. "Towels are in the cabinet, and there's soap and shampoo that won't hurt your skin." I tested it on some pretty exotic biological samples in grad school. She wandered toward the hallway, pausing to examine the photos on the walls. "These places, you've traveled to all of them." "Most of them." I study how life adapts to extreme environments. Bacteria in volcanic vents, plants in radioactive soil, animals in the deep ocean trenches. I'm fascinated by the ways living things refuse to give up, even when everything seems impossible. She stopped in front of a photo I'd taken in the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth, where life persisted in forms so alien they might as well have been from another planet. "Like me," she said. "Like you." The sound of water running came from the bathroom, followed by a gasp of pure pleasure that made me smile despite everything. When was the last time she'd been truly clean, truly warm? When was the last time someone had offered her comfort without expecting something in return? I busied myself in the kitchen, pulling ingredients for pancakes from the pantry and trying not to think about the countdown on her arm. 2 hours and 37 minutes until the choice became irreversible. 2 hours and 37 minutes to find a third option that didn't involve her sacrificing herself. My laptop sat on the kitchen counter, and I flipped it open, fingers flying over the keys. If Zara was a living computer programmed with her species' most advanced knowledge, then maybe the solution wasn't magical. Maybe it was technological. Maybe there was a way to transfer the archive, copy it, distribute it across multiple hosts so the burden didn't fall entirely on one scared child. The shower turned off, and a few minutes later, Zara emerged wearing one of my old university sweatshirts and a pair of shorts that were too big for her. Her hair was clean and brushed, falling in damp waves around her shoulders, and her bioluminescent patterns seemed brighter, more vibrant against skin that was no longer dulled by days of fear and neglect. She looked like what she was, a kid who just had a really good shower. "Better?" I asked. "I had forgotten," she said, settling onto one of the kitchen stools and watching me work. What it felt like to be clean, to be warm, to be safe, even for a little while. I poured batter into the pan, the familiar ritual of cooking giving my hands something to do while my mind raced. Zara, the archive. Is it purely biological, or are there technological components? Her patterns shifted to thoughtful purple. Both. The biological matrix stores the information, but it interfaces with quantum structures that exist partially outside normal spacetime. That's how it can process calculations that would take your most advanced computers millions of years. And when you activate it, those quantum structures collapse. Exactly. The cascade reaction consumes both the biological and quantum components, converting them into creative energy that seeds new possibilities across a vast area of space. She paused, watching me flip the first pancake. Why? I slid the pancake onto a plate and started another. Because if the quantum structures exist partially outside normal spacetime, then theoretically they could be interfaced with from multiple points simultaneously. Instead of one catastrophic collapse, we might be able to create a controlled extraction. Her eyes widened. You're talking about downloading the archive. I'm talking about copying it. Creating multiple versions across multiple hosts so that when the time comes to activate the weapon, the burden is distributed. I added blueberries to the second pancake, a touch of normalcy in an impossible conversation. It would still require massive energy input, but not necessarily your complete self-destruction. Sarah. Her voice was gentle but firm. My people tried that. Some of our greatest minds worked for generations to find ways to share the archive's burden. It's not just information. It's a living system that requires a specific type of consciousness to operate. A consciousness that has to be shaped from birth, prepared through experiences of loss and hope and connection. I set the plate in front of her along with syrup and butter. Then we make more of those consciousnesses. She stared at me. You mean create more archives? More children like me? I mean find people who are already shaped by the right experiences. Refugees, survivors, people who understand what it means to carry the weight of an entire world's hopes. I sat across from her with my own plate. People like us. For a long moment, the only sound was the clink of silverware as we ate. The pancakes were good, fluffy and sweet with just the right amount of vanilla. But I could barely taste them. My mind was spinning through possibilities, calculations, desperate hope. It could work, Zara said finally. If we could find the right people, prepare them quickly enough, establish the quantum interfaces. She shook her head. But we'd need at least 3 additional hosts, and the preparation process takes hours of direct neural contact. And even then, there's no guarantee we'd survive the activation. But there's a chance. There's a chance. She looked down at her arm, where the countdown continued its relentless progression. 2 hours and 18 minutes. But Sarah, even if we found the right people, even if we could prepare them in time, who would volunteer for something like this? Who would risk becoming a living weapon against forces beyond human comprehension? I thought about Mrs. Patterson, about the social worker who'd risked her career to help one scared refugee child. I thought about the thousands of people like her, scattered across the world, who chose compassion over fear when faced with the unknown. More people than you think, I said. The question is, how do we find them, and how do we get them here before time runs out? Outside, the sound of aircraft engines filled the air. Not the roar of jets this time, but the whisper-quiet hum of technology that shouldn't exist. Through the kitchen window, I could see lights in the sky, not stars, but the running lights of ships that had followed us home. Zara's patterns flared brilliant red. They found us. I grabbed my laptop and her hand simultaneously. Then we'd better work fast. The basement of my house had been converted into a research lab years ago, back when I was doing classified work for the government on extremophile bacteria. It was shielded, soundproofed, and most importantly, it had its own power supply independent of the main grid. If we were going to attempt something that violated several laws of physics, this was the place to do it. Zara sat in the center of the room on a meditation cushion I'd borrowed from upstairs, her legs crossed, her entire body now pulsing with patterns so complex they made my eyes water to follow them. The countdown on her arm had shifted from numbers to symbols I didn't recognize, but the urgency was unmistakable. 1 hour and 43 minutes. I've sent the messages, I said, closing my laptop. Emergency contacts, people I trust, called in every favor I've accumulated in 20 years of academic networking. How many? 12 possibilities. All of them with the right psychological profile, survivors, people who've rebuilt their lives after losing everything, individuals who understand sacrifice for the greater good. I sat down across from her. But even if they all come, even if they all agree to this insanity, we still don't know if human consciousness can interface with your quantum structures. Zara's patterns shifted to deep blue-green, the color I'd learned meant she was accessing the deepest levels of the archive. There's only one way to find out. We need to establish a test connection, see if your neural pathways can handle the data flow. What does that involve? Full contact, skin to skin, mind to mind. I open the archive's surface layers and see if your consciousness can touch them without being destroyed. She looked up at me with those ancient eyes. Sarah, I need you to understand. This could kill you. Human brains aren't designed to process quantum information. The feedback could burn out your entire nervous system. Upstairs, something heavy landed on my roof. Not footsteps, the sound of a ship setting down with impossible gentleness. Through the basement's reinforced walls, I could hear the whisper of alien technology powering up. They're here, I said. Multiple contacts, Zara confirmed, her patterns flaring with alarm. 3 hunters, plus support vessels. They're not taking any chances this time. A sound came from above. Not quite a knock, not quite an explosion. My front door simply ceased to exist, along with most of the adjoining wall. Footsteps echoed through the house, too heavy to be human, too deliberate to be hurried. The basement is shielded, I whispered. They might not detect us immediately. They don't need to detect us. They can wait. Time is on their side. Zara reached out her hand to me. But if we're going to try this, we need to do it now. Before the others arrive, before we lose the chance entirely. I stared at her outstretched palm, glowing with bioluminescent patterns that contained the compressed knowledge of an entire civilization. Touching her hand would either give us the key to saving 2 worlds or kill me instantly. Maybe both. The people I called, I said. If this works, if we establish the connection, how long do we have to prepare additional hosts? Minutes, not hours. The archive will recognize compatible consciousness patterns and begin automatic preparation, but the process is intense. Some people won't survive it. Footsteps on the stairs above us. Slow, measured, confident. They'd found the basement door. And if it doesn't work, if human consciousness can't interface with the archive. Zara's expression was heartbreaking in its certainty. Then I activate the cascade reaction manually. Better to save 1 world than lose both. The basement door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal. 3 hunters stood at the top of the stairs, their dark forms silhouetted against the light from above. When they spoke, Their voices harmonized into something that made my bones ache. Return the archive. Final warning. Sarah, Zara whispered. Trust me. One more time. I took her hand. The moment our skin made contact, reality exploded. I was falling through layers of information so dense they had physical weight. My consciousness stretched across dimensions that existed in the spaces between thoughts. I saw the birth of Zara's world, watched her people evolve from simple bioluminescent creatures into beings of living light. I witnessed the first appearance of the Devourers, entities from the dark spaces between galaxies that fed on life itself, converting entire civilizations into hunger and emptiness. But I also saw something else, something Zara had never mentioned. The Devourers weren't invaders. They were gardeners. They consumed civilizations that had grown beyond a certain point, harvesting the accumulated knowledge and experience before seeding new worlds with the potential for different forms of life. It was brutal, cosmic-scale agriculture that operated on timescales spanning millions of years. You knew, I gasped, my voice somehow audible despite the fact that we existed in a space beyond sound. You knew they weren't just destroyers. Yes, Zara replied, her consciousness intertwined with mine in ways that transcended physical contact. But knowing and accepting are different things. They may see themselves as gardeners, but they're still planning to harvest 7 billion human lives. I pushed deeper into the archive, my human consciousness somehow adapting to process information that should have been impossible. I saw the weapon's true design, not just a destroyer of devourers, but a replacement system. Where the harvesters took life to create emptiness, the archive would take emptiness to create life. It's not a weapon, I realized. It's a competing system. You're going to out-evolve them. Exactly. Become better gardeners, create better gardens. But it requires sacrifice. I know. But as I explored the quantum structures that made up the archive's core, I began to see possibilities that even Zara's people hadn't considered. But maybe not the kind of sacrifice you think. Above us, the hunters had reached the bottom of the stairs. I could feel their presence like ice water in my veins, their corrupted bioluminescence pressing against the archive's defenses. They were powerful, ancient, certain of their superiority. They had no idea what they were facing. Sarah, Zara whispered, and I realized her voice was coming from everywhere at once. The connection is stable. Your consciousness is compatible. If the others come, they're already here, I said, somehow sensing the arrivals upstairs. Not all 12 of the people I'd contacted, but enough. Dr. Maria Santos, a psychologist who'd survived the Brazilian climate wars. James Kim, a former refugee from North Korea who now ran a shelter for displaced children. Anna Volkov, a Russian biologist who'd rebuilt her career after losing everything in the Siberian fires. People who understood loss. People who chose hope anyway. Can you prepare them? I asked. If they're willing. If they can handle the process. If we have enough time. Zara's patterns were shifting faster now, the archive beginning to recognize and catalog the consciousness patterns of the new arrivals. But Sarah, even if this works, even if we distribute the burden successfully, what comes after? What happens to us? I felt the answer forming in the quantum structures around us, a possibility so beautiful and terrifying that it took my breath away. We become something new. Not human, not your species, but something that can stand between the devourers and the worlds they want to harvest. Gardeners of gardeners. The first hunter reached the bottom of the stairs and began walking toward us. Where its feet touched the concrete floor, the material aged and cracked, life draining away into the hungry darkness that surrounded it. Contact the others, I said. Establish the connections. If we're going to become cosmic gardeners, we're going to need all the help we can get. Zara's hand tightened in mine, and suddenly I was connected not just to her, but to every compatible consciousness in the house above. I felt Maria's fierce determination, James's unshakable compassion, Anna's brilliant curiosity. 4 minds, then 5 as others joined the network, each bringing their own strength to bear against the approaching darkness. The hunter was 10 feet away when the transformation began. The first thing I noticed was that fear had become impossible. Not because the danger was gone. The hunters still advanced through the basement like living shadows, their corruption reaching toward us with hungry tendrils, but because fear required a sense of separation between self and threat. When you existed as part of a network of consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions, the concept of self became beautifully irrelevant. I was Sarah Chen, xenobiologist and former refugee. I was also Maria Santos, psychologist and survivor of climate wars. I was James Kim, shelter director and keeper of hope. I was Anna Volkov, researcher and phoenix risen from ash. I was Zara, last child of a dying world and living archive of impossible knowledge. I was all of us, and we were something entirely new. The archive had distributed itself across our linked consciousnesses, each mind becoming a processing node in a quantum computer that operated partially outside normal spacetime. The countdown on Zara's arm had stopped, not because time had run out, but because we had stepped outside linear time entirely. "Fascinating," said the lead hunter, pausing just out of arm's reach. Its voice carried harmonics that would have been beautiful if they hadn't been corrupted by eons of consuming life. The archive has found new hosts. Primitive ones, but perhaps adequate for our purposes. Through our shared awareness, we accessed the archive's deepest knowledge about these creatures. They had once been like Zara's people, beings of living light who had achieved perfect harmony between consciousness and quantum mechanics. But somewhere in their development, they had made a different choice. Instead of using their abilities to create and nurture, they had decided that their role was to harvest and consume. "You misunderstand our purpose," we said, speaking with voices that harmonized across the electromagnetic spectrum. Zara's bioluminescent patterns had spread to the rest of us, our skin now glowing with symbols that rewrote the laws of physics in real time. "We are not hosts. We are gardeners." The hunter's laugh was like the sound of stars dying. "Gardeners? You are insects who have consumed something beyond your comprehension. When we extract the archive from your primitive nervous systems, perhaps we will preserve enough of your consciousness to serve as entertainment." It reached toward us with one corrupted hand, fingers trailing darkness that ate light itself. We caught its wrist. The moment of contact was like touching a live wire connected to the heat death of the universe. The hunter's consciousness pressed against ours, trying to overwhelm and consume us the way it had consumed billions of others across the galaxy. It had expected to find the same kind of individual awareness it was used to harvesting, singular minds that could be isolated, corrupted, and devoured. Instead, it found a network. Every attempt to consume one node only connected it more deeply to the others. Every effort to corrupt our shared consciousness was met by healing patterns from multiple sources. The hunter found itself not consuming us, but being consumed by us, not destroyed, but transformed. "What have you done?" It gasped, its voice no longer harmonious but fractured across multiple octaves of surprise and growing fear. "What gardeners do," we replied. "We compost." Through the quantum structures of the archive, we began the process of breaking down the hunter's corrupted patterns, separating the original consciousness from the hunger that had infected it. It was like performing surgery on the concept of identity itself, requiring precision that would have been impossible for any individual mind, but was almost trivial for our networked awareness. The other hunters backed away, their confidence evaporating as they watched their companion undergo rapid transformation. The dark corruption that had defined its existence for millennia was dissolving, revealing the bioluminescent being it had once been, beautiful, curious, capable of creation rather than just consumption. "You were gardeners once too," we told them, extending our awareness toward the remaining hunters. "Before you chose to become the harvest instead of the harvesters. Let us help you remember." One of them turned and fled, its form dissolving into shadow as it raced back up the stairs. But the third hunter, smaller, younger than the others, hesitated. Through the archive's knowledge, we sensed something different about this one. The corruption ran less deep, the original consciousness still fighting against the hunger that had been imposed upon it. I remember, it whispered, its voice filled with wonder and terror. I remember what we were before, what we chose to become. The choice can be unmade, we said gently, but only if you're willing to let go of what you think you are and remember what you used to be. The hunter, no longer truly a hunter, knelt in the basement of my house and placed its hands on the concrete floor. Where it touched, bioluminescent patterns began to spread, healing the damage it had caused during its approach. The others, it said. The Devourer fleet. They're coming. When the first hunters don't report back, they'll send everything. Ships that can crack planets, weapons that can unravel the quantum structure of reality itself. Through our shared consciousness, we felt the weight of that revelation. The immediate threat was contained, but the larger danger remained. Somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, a fleet of corrupted gardeners was preparing for the final harvest of Earth. Then we'd better get to work, we said. The transformation we'd undergone was just the beginning. The archive contained the accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization that had faced this exact challenge and found the solution, not victory through violence, but evolution through compassion. We could become something the Devourers had never encountered. Gardeners who refused to see any consciousness as irredeemable, who treated even cosmic-scale corruption as compostable material for new growth. But it would require expanding beyond our small network. The archive's knowledge needed to be distributed to others, creating nodes of awakened consciousness across the planet. Not everyone would be compatible. The process required specific psychological patterns, experiences of loss and recovery that shaped minds in particular ways. Fortunately, Earth was full of such people. Sarah, Zara's individual voice cut through our shared awareness, still distinct even within the network. I need to ask you something important. What? Are you still you? When you look at yourself through our connection, do you still recognize the person who offered a scared alien girl a warm shower? I considered the question carefully. I was still Sarah Chen, but I was also much more than that. My consciousness had expanded to encompass perspectives and possibilities I never could have imagined as a purely human being. But at the core, the essential part of me that had chosen compassion over fear remained unchanged. I'm still me, I said. Just bigger. Good, she said, and I felt her relief ripple through our connection. Because we're going to need that part of you for what comes next. Above us, I could sense the arrival of more ships, not hunters this time, but the remnants of Zara's people, drawn by the quantum signature of the archive's activation. They were terrified, certain that the weapon had fallen into the wrong hands, prepared to witness the final destruction of their species' legacy. Let's go show them what real gardening looks like, we said, and began to rise. The movement wasn't physical. Our bodies remained in the basement, still connected hand to hand in a circle around Zara. But our consciousness expanded upward and outward, touching first the house, then the neighborhood, then the city. Everywhere we made contact, we left behind seeds of possibility. Bioluminescent patterns that would activate incompatible minds, quantum structures that would allow others to join our growing network. Phoenix lit up like a constellation as thousands of people suddenly found themselves connected to something larger than individual existence. Most of them handled the transition well. The city had always been full of survivors, people who'd adapted to impossible circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful anyway. By dawn, our network spanned the continent. By the end of the week, it would circle the globe. When the Devourer fleet finally arrived, expecting to find a planet ready for harvest, they would instead discover something unprecedented in their millions of years of existence. A world that refused to be consumed, populated by gardeners who saw corruption as just another form of compost, who met hunger with abundance and darkness with light. Not through violence, but through transformation. Not through conquest, but through compassion. The scared alien girl who had drawn star charts in the sand was gone, evolved into something magnificent and strange. But she was also still there, still asking the same question that had started everything. Will you help me? The answer, spreading across 2 worlds and countless consciousnesses, was unanimous. Yes. And in that yes, the universe discovered what it meant to be gardened by gardeners who refused to let anything stay lost forever.